Hopefully this is better. Scythe Curie raised her eyebrows, considering the response, and said, "Acceptable. And thinking of the family is a nice touch, even in hypothetical." Then she grinned. "I'm disappointed I couldn't prove you imperfect." Next was a boy whose gaze was fixed on a spot on the back wall, clearly trying to find his happy place. "Noah Zabarsky?" said Curie. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice quivered. Citra wondered what sort of response that might evoke from Curie. What sort of question might she ask a boy so frightened? "Name for me 5 species that generate neurotoxins powerful enough to be effective on a poison-tipped dart." The boy, who had been holding his breath, exhaled with a loud relief. "Well, Philobites auratania, of course, better known as the poison dart frog," he said, "the blue-ringed octopus, the marble-cone snail, the inland taipan snake, and, the death-stalker scorpion." "Excellent," the Scythe Curie said. "Can you name any more?" "Yes," Noah told her, "but you said 1 question." "And what if I tell you I've changed my mind, and I want 6 instead of 5? Noah took a deep breath, but didn't hold it. "Then I would tell you in a most respectful way that you were not honoring your word, and a Scythe is duty-bound to honor their word." Scythe Curie smiled. "Acceptable answer. Very good." And then she moved on to Citra Terra Nova. She had realized the Scythe knew everyone's name, and yet it came as a shock to hear her say it. "Yes, Honorable Scythe Curie." The woman leaned in close, peering deeply into Citra's eyes. "What is the worst thing you have ever done?" Citra was prepared for just about any question but that one. "Excuse me? It's a simple question, dear. What is the worst thing you've ever done?" Citra's jaw clenched. Her mouth went dry. She knew the answer. She didn't even have to think about it. "Can I have a moment?" "Take your time." Then some random Scythe in the audience heckled, "She's done so many terrible things, she's having trouble selecting just one." Laughter everywhere. In that moment, she hated them all. Citra held eye contact with Scythe Curie. All those all-seeing gray eyes. She knew she couldn't back away from the question. "When I was 8, she began, "I tripped a girl down the stairs. She broke her neck and had to spend 3 days at a revival center. I never told her that it was me. That's the worst thing I ever did." Scythe Curie nodded and offered a sympathetic grin, then said, "You're lying, dear." She turned to the crowd, shaking her head perhaps a little bit sadly. "Unacceptable answer." Then she turned back to Citra. "Step down," she said. "Scythe Faraday will choose your punishment." She didn't argue. She didn't insist that she was telling the truth, because she wasn't. She had no idea how Scythe Curie knew. Citra went back to her place, unable to look at Scythe Faraday, and he said nothing to her. Then Scythe Curie moved on to Rowan, who seemed so smug, Citra just wanted to hit him. "Rowan Damish?" Scythe Curie asked. "What do you fear? What do you fear above all else?" Rowan did not hesitate in his response. He shrugged and said, "I don't fear anything." Citra wasn't sure she heard him right. Did he say he didn't fear anything? Had he lost his mind? "Perhaps you want to take some time before answering?" Scythe Curie prompted, but Rowan just shook his head. "I don't need any more time. That's my answer. Not gonna change it." Absolute silence in the room. Citra found herself involuntarily shaking her head, and then she realized he was doing this for her, so she wouldn't have to suffer alone through whatever punishment was in store, so she wouldn't feel she had fallen behind him. Although she still wanted to smack him, now it was for an entirely different reason. "So," said Scythe Curie, "today we have 1 perfect apprentice and 1 fearless one," she sighed. "But I'm afraid that no one is entirely fearless, so your answer, as I'm sure you must know, is unacceptable." She waited, perhaps thinking Rowan might respond to that, but he did not. He just waited for her to say, "Step down. Scythe Faraday will choose your punishment." Rowan returned to his place next to Citra as nonchalant as could be. "You're an idiot," she whispered to him. He gave her the same shrug he gave Scythe Curie. Guess so. You think I don't know why you did that? Maybe I did it so that I'll look better at the next conclave. Maybe if I gave too good an answer today, my next question would be harder. But Citra knew it was false. Faulty logic. Rowan didn't think that way, and then Scythe Faraday spoke up, his voice quiet and measured, but somehow carrying an intensity that was chilling. You shouldn't have done that. I'll accept whatever punishment you see fit, Rowan said. It's not about the punishment, he snapped. By now, Scythe Curie had questioned a few more apprentices. One was sent to sit, 2 others stayed. Maybe Scythe Curie will see what I did as noble, Rowan suggested. Yes, and so will everyone else, Faraday said. Motives can easily be beaten into weapons. Which proves, Citra said to Rowan, that you're an idiot. But he only grinned idiotically. She thought she had the last word on the matter and that it was over until they returned home, where no doubt Scythe Faraday would inflict some annoying but fair punishment that fit the crime. She was mistaken. After the apprentices were done being traumatized, the focus of the Scythe began to wear down. There was now a constant murmur of Scythe's discussed dinner plans as the hour approached 7. The remaining business was of vital interest to anyone, issues of building maintenance and whether or not Scythe should be required to announce the turning of a corner, so it wasn't so shocking when they looked 30 years younger at the next conclave. It was as things were wrapping up that one Scythe stood up and loudly addressed Inocrates. She was the one dressed in green with emeralds embroidered into her robe, one of Scythe Goddard's bunch. Excuse me, Your Excellency, she began, although clearly she was speaking to the entire assembly, not just the High Blade. I'm finding myself troubled by this set of new apprentices, more specifically, the apprentices taken on by Honorable Scythe Faraday. Both Citra and Rowan looked up. Faraday did not. He seemed frozen, looking downward, almost in meditation, or perhaps steeling himself for what was to come. To the best of my knowledge, a Scythe has never taken on 2 apprentices and set them in competition for the ring, she continued. Inocrates looked over to the parliamentarian, who had jurisdiction in such matters. There is no law against it, Scythe Rand, said the parliamentarian. Yes, Scythe Rand continued, but clearly the competition has turned into camaraderie. How will we ever know which is the better candidate if they continue to aid each other? Your complaint is duly noted, said Inocrates, but Scythe Rand was not done. I propose that to ensure the competition is truly a competition, we add a slight stipulation. Scythe Faraday rose to his feet as if launched from his chair. I object, he shouted. This conclave cannot stipulate how I train my apprentices. It is my sole right to teach them, train them, and discipline them. Rand held up her hands in a gesture of mocking magnanimity. I merely seek to make your ultimate choice fair and honest. Do you think you can beguile this conclave with your baubles and vanity? We are not so base as to be dazzled by shiny things. What is your proposal, Scythe Rand? Asked Inocrates. I object, shouted Faraday. You can't object to something she has not yet said. Faraday bit down his objection and waited. Citra watched, feeling almost detached, as if this were a tennis match and it was match point. But she wasn't an observer, was she? She was the ball, and so was Rowan. I propose, said Scythe Rand, with the slickness of a Deathstalker scorpion, that upon the confirmation of the winner, the first order of business will be for that winner to glean the loser. Gasps and grumbles from around the room. That makes no sense. That line is like pointless. And Citra couldn't believe it. Some laughter and affirmations as well. She wanted to believe the woman in green could not be serious, that this was yet another level of the test. Faraday was so beside himself, he said nothing at first. He couldn't even find the words to object. Finally, he thundered his fury like a force of nature, of wave pounding the shore. This flies in the face of everything we are, everything we do. We are in the business of gleaning, but you and Scythe Goddard and all his disciples, you would turn this into a blood sport. Nonsense, said Rand. It makes perfect sense. The threat of gleaning will ensure that the best applicant comes out on top. And then, rather than striking it down as ridiculous, to Citra's horror, Inocrates turned to the parliamentarian. Is there a rule against it? The parliamentarian considered and said, Since there is no precedent for the treatment of a double apprenticeship, there are no rules as to how it should be dealt with. The proposal is within our guidelines. Guidelines, shouted Scythe Faraday. Guidelines? The moral fabric of the Scythedom should be our guidelines. To even consider this is barbaric. Oh, please, said Inocrates with an exaggerated sweep of his hand. Suppress all the melodrama, Faraday. This is, after all, the consequence of your decision to take on 2 apprentices, when 1 would have been sufficient. Then the clock began to strike 7 o'clock. I demand a full debate and vote on this, Scythe Faraday pleaded, but 3 bells had already rung, and Inocrates ignored him. As is my prerogative as High Blade, I so stipulate that in the matter of Rowan Demish and Citra Terranova, whosoever shall prevail will be required to glean the other upon receipt of his or her ring. Then he banged his gavel heavily upon the rostrum, adjourning conclave and sealing their fate. There are times I long for a relationship with the Thunderhead. I suppose we always want what we can't have. Others can call on the Thunderhead for advice, ask it to resolve disputes. Some rely on it as a confidant, for it's known to have a compassionate, impartial ear. Them uses the Thunderhead for countless tasks, but to us it's simply a database, a tool, nothing more. An entity as a mind, the Thunderhead does not exist for us. And yet it does, and we know it. Estrangement from the collective consciousness of humanity's wisdom is just one more thing that sets Scythe. Does it despise us, Scythe? Does it but abides us because it has to? Or does it simply choose not to think of us at all? And which is worse, to be despised or to be ignored? Side now, but the darkness could have been the airless expanse of space. I won't do it, Citra finally said, breaking the silence that had engulfed them since leaving the conclave. They can't make me do it. Faraday didn't say a word. Didn't even look at her. So Rowan took it upon himself to answer. Yes, they can. Finally, Faraday looked to them. Rowan is right, he said. They will find whatever button will make you dance. And dance you will, no matter how hideous the tune. Citra kicked the empty seat in front of her. How could they be so awful? And attacking Rowan and Citra was a warning shot. What if we both fail? Citra suggested. If we're lousy apprentices, then they can't choose either of us. And yet, they will. Faraday told her with an authority and finality that left little room for doubt. No matter how poorly you perform, they will still choose one of you, for the spectacle alone. Then he scowled in disgust and to set the precedent. He said with a world-weary sigh. Never before have there been so many wheels within wheels in the Scythedom. Rowan closed his eyes, wishing he could close his mind as well as hide from his own thoughts. In 8 months, I will be killed by Citra, he thought, or I will kill her. And calling it gleaning didn't change the fact of what it was. He cared for Citra, but enough to surrender. Whatever happens, I want you to know. Don't, Rowan told her. Just don't. And the rest of the ride was silence. Citra, who is not the the compassionate, and those who did not seem to care. Such a delicate charge as pruning the human race should not be subject to the quirks of personality. Scythes were supposed to be above all the petty, just as they were above the law. Just as an ordinary day like any other, the rain had passed and came with no great fanfare. It was just an ordinary day like any other. The rain had passed, and the sun peeked from behind shifting clouds. It was Rowan's turn to make breakfast, eggs and hash browns. He never cooked the potatoes long enough. Hash pails, Citra always called them. 30 world had slid off its axis. Breakfast was breakfast. How dare it be? In your studies? Yes, Scythe Verde. Faraday, Citra said, and then with Rowan saying the same in a half-second echo. For you, nothing has changed. Citra looked down into her cereal. It was Citra looked down into her cereal. It was Rowan who dared to state the obvious. Perhaps everything will change again. Then he left them. The space between Rowan and Citra had quickly become a minefield, a dangerous no-man's land that promised nothing but misery. It was hard enough to negotiate with which would feel painfully wrong without Citra sitting with him. Still, he kept his door cracked, on the faint hope that she'd want to bridge the distance. He heard her leave, probably for a run, and she was gone for a good long time. Her way of dealing with the dark discomfort of their new situation was to... Oh, give me it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Right, go finish watching Clifford. He stood up outside her closed door for at least a full minute before he turned the knob and slowly opened the door. She was in the middle of a room with a hunting knife, practicing bladecraft against the empty air, as if battling ghosts. Nice technique, Rowan said, then added, if you're planning on gleaning a pack of angry wolves. Skill is skill. He was babbling. You were right to shut me up. The moment he began to get awkward, so Rowan just went for it. Should we talk about this? I kill you or you kill me. Either way, I don't want to think about it until I have to. She glanced at the open book, turned it right side up, and then gave up the charade completely, closing it and tossing it to the floor. I just want to be left alone, okay? Even so, Rowan sat on the edge of her bed, and when she didn't tell him to go, he shook her. There was no denying that anymore. He had suppressed the urge for weeks because he knew it would not be tolerated by the Scythe. But Faraday wasn't here, and turmoil had both been hurled into, had washed all bets off the table. Then, to his surprise, she suddenly lurched forward and kissed him, catching him completely off guard. Possibility. But in the end, she said, what good would it do, really, for either of us? She moved farther away on the bed, bringing her knees to her chest. I haven't fallen in love with you, Rowan, and I want to keep it that way. Aw, you got your baby?
Yeah.
What's her name? What's the baby's name?
2, 3. He's hungry.
She's hungry?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, go find her bottle and feed her then. Rowan got up and moved to the safety of the threshold before turning her...
I can't.
Well, go play in your room, please, okay?
I can't find it.
Rowan got up and moved to the safety of the threshold before turning back to her. It's all right, Citra, he told her. I haven't fallen in love with you either. I am not a man easily brought to fury, but how dare the old guard Scythe presume to dictate my behavior? Let every last one of them glean themselves, and we can be done with their self-loathing, sanctimonious ways. I am a man who chooses to glean with pride, not shame. I choose to embrace life, even as I deal death. Make no mistakes, we Scythes are above law because we deserve to be... What? The cat high ground, but because they enjoy the shaking of life. After all, this